Stephen Miller's voice slices through the chamber like a blade dulled by arrogance. "If you'll let me finish," he snaps, his tone soaked in the certainty of someone who's never been told no. It's the sixth time he's interrupted her, and everyone in the room feels it, the grinding disrespect, the tension thick enough to taste. Pens stop tapping, cameras zoom in. The sound of air itself seems to hold its breath. Jasmine Crockett doesn't flinch. Her eyes lift from the paper in front of her, locking on him with the kind of calm that isn't silence, it's strategy. She doesn't raise her voice, she raises the temperature. Every inch of her stillness feels like defiance sharpened into art. A whisper ripples through the back row. Someone mutters, "He's really doing this again?" The clerk shifts uncomfortably. Even Miller senses the edge of the moment, but arrogance is a habit too deep to break. He leans forward, mouth open to strike again, until she moves. Just a small tilt of her head, but it freezes him. The narrator's voice cuts in like the echo of collective disbelief. 6 times he tried to silence her, but on the 7th breath, she reminded the chamber and the nation who really holds the mic. The air vibrates with the friction of power meeting poise. For a heartbeat, it's not politics, it's theater. A clash between ego and elegance, between a man accustomed to control and a woman who has mastered the art of refusing it. Crockett inhales, her tone steady, her words deliberate. "Mr. Miller," she begins, every syllable landing like a gavel. "I've given you space. Now it's my turn to speak." The murmurs swell. The press gallery leans forward. Outside, millions will soon watch this clip, rewinding to the exact frame where her eyes met his and everything shifted. But here, in this instant, only one truth matters. He's underestimated her the last time. She doesn't finish her thought yet. She doesn't need to. The pause becomes a promise, the silence its own kind of power. Because what led to this moment wasn't just an argument, it was years of arrogance meeting a woman who refused to shrink. Hours before the clash that would set the internet ablaze, the chamber looked deceptively calm. Nameplates gleamed under sterile light. Stacks of notes and reports waited like loaded weapons. Stephen Miller sat poised, his papers aligned with obsessive precision, his smirk already rehearsed. He opened the session with the confidence of someone who believed his version of decorum was the law of the land. "Let's keep this professional," he said smoothly. "Tone and discipline matter." To anyone unfamiliar with Washington theater, his words sounded harmless. But to those who've lived the weight of that language, the meaning was clear. Tone, discipline. Those weren't calls for civility. They were coded commands. They meant, know your place. Speak softer. Don't make me uncomfortable. Across from him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, posture composed, pen tapping lightly against her notes. She'd heard these words her entire career, dressed up in politeness, sharpened with entitlement. But today, she wasn't just listening. She was studying. Every syllable Miller uttered was a tell, every pause an opening. The narrator's voice glides through the tension like a pulse under the surface. For some, power is volume. For others, it's patience, the kind that waits for the perfect moment to strike. As Miller continued, his rhythm grew predictable. "What this committee needs," he insisted, "is discipline. Discipline in tone, discipline in respect, discipline in process." Each repetition tightened the leash of his rhetoric. His audience nodded politely, unaware that his words weren't meant for everyone, only for her. Crockett leaned back, letting him speak himself into a corner. Viewers watching later would recognize that look, calm calculation behind steady eyes. She wasn't silent because she lacked a response. She was silent because she understood timing. In a room built to echo the voices of men like him, her composure was its own act of rebellion. The camera pans across faces, some disinterested, others uneasy. The tension isn't just political, it's personal. Because this moment, from millions watching later, will mirror 1,000 smaller ones they've lived themselves. Being interrupted in a meeting, spoken over, dismissed with a smile. The chamber becomes a metaphor, a stage for every injustice cloaked in civility. The narrator continues, because in politics, what's said isn't always the story. Sometimes it's what's withheld that changes everything. He pauses for effect, glances her way, and smirks, as if daring her to challenge him. The moment lingers just long enough for discomfort to fill the air. And then he interrupts her for the first time. Then again, and again, and again, each one bolder, more dismissive than the last, until it's no longer about a debate. It's about dominance. The audience feels it. This isn't just about policy anymore. It's about visibility, respect, and the right to exist without permission. And as he leans in for interruption number 6, the room shifts. This time, she's ready. Before the chamber, before the cameras, before that 6th interruption that would ricochet across the internet, there was Stephen Miller, the self-styled intellectual of the hard right, the man who built his career on the quiet conviction that control was proof of genius. His rise had never been accidental. It was engineered, brick by brick, from college podiums to White House corridors. Each speech, each memo, another line in the architecture of entitlement he mistook for destiny. He had always believed words could build fortresses. When others argued policy, he crafted barricades of language, phrases like security, purity, law and order, polished until they gleamed, hollow but heavy enough to crush dissent. The narrator's voice drifts through flashes of memory, a young Miller standing before a microphone at Duke University, denouncing political correctness with theatrical outrage. A 20-something aide whispering in senators' ears about cultural erosion. A senior advisor in the Oval Office drafting policies that turned families into statistics. For years, the narrator says, his words shaped walls, not laws. His rhetoric was a weapon, forged in fear and polished in power. He learned early that cruelty delivered in perfect grammar could sound like conviction, that dismissiveness wrapped in confidence could masquerade as intellect. And so he built his empire, not from compassion, but from control, the belief that authority meant the right to decide who gets to speak and who must stay silent. Colleagues remember the way he filled rooms, not with volume, but with smug certainty. He'd tilt his head, squint slightly, and begin a sentence with, "actually," a word that turned every exchange into a hierarchy. For years, few challenged him. His precision made others hesitate. His proximity to power made them afraid. He carried that energy into every confrontation with women who dared to meet him head-on. He would smirk when corrected, overtalk when cornered, and pivot every question into a lecture. He didn't just interrupt, he erased. And for a long time it worked. But arrogance is a fragile armor. Beneath it lives insecurity, the kind that demands constant proof of superiority. So when Jasmine Crockett entered the room that morning, confident and unbothered, Miller's instinct wasn't curiosity, it was panic disguised as contempt. The narrator continues, he had spent a lifetime rehearsing dominance, but dominance is not intelligence, it's fear of being outshone. The record shows a man fluent in manipulation, drafting talking points that reduced complex humanity to sound bites, designing immigration policies that treated compassion as weakness. He understood television, he understood outrage, and he understood that interrupting someone could be as effective as disproving them. To him, visibility itself was a threat. In closed-door meetings, aides recall him speaking over staffers, correcting women mid-sentence, dissecting their tone as if emotion were evidence of incompetence. The pattern became performance, an art form of dismissal. He wielded interruption like punctuation. But arrogance, when repeated long enough, dulls awareness. Miller never noticed that the world outside his circle had changed. He didn't see that people were learning to name the tactics he used, to recognize the coded politeness of power, to laugh at the fragility hidden behind his confidence. He still thought the old tricks worked: condescend, overtalk, reframe, move on. The camera cuts back to the present hearing. That same smirk, the same rehearsed patience, the same tone sharpened by years of unchecked authority. He believed this would be another performance. Him, the lecturer; her, the audience. What he didn't know was that this time, the audience was already on her side. For all his eloquence, his legacy was built on exclusion. His sentences sounded precise because they were stripped of empathy. His pauses felt strategic because they were empty. And behind every speech about order was the quiet conviction that equality was disorder. The narrator lowers the voice, intimate, deliberate. Arrogance can build monuments, but it can't build character. And sooner or later, every monument meets the moment it begins to crumble. In that hearing room, surrounded by cameras and staffers, Miller faced something he hadn't planned for: a woman who refused to play his game. Her patience wasn't submission, it was preparation. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was warning. He didn't see it yet, but his rhythm was about to break. His rehearsed control was about to fracture under the weight of her composure. Because arrogance feeds on chaos, and she gave him none. Every time he interrupted, she grew steadier. Every word he spat out to dominate became another brick she quietly lifted from his wall. The audience watching later would feel it, the slow reversal of gravity. The man who'd once dictated the room, now shrinking within it. And the woman he tried to silence, growing larger, not in volume, but in presence. It was poetic, almost cruel in its symmetry. He'd built his life on speaking over others. He'd never learned what it felt like when the world stopped listening. The narrator's voice cuts one final time, cool and precise. For years, he drew blueprints for power, but every architect meets the structure they didn't account for. And hers was truth. Before the cameras, before the viral moment that froze a nation mid-scroll, there was Jasmine Crockett, a Texas daughter who learned early that silence was never safety. Her story doesn't begin in marble halls or polished offices. It begins with heat, the kind that settles over Dallas in July, thick and humming, and a young girl watching her mother navigate two jobs with grace that felt like defiance. She was never raised for comfort. She was raised for clarity. The narrator's voice glides over flashes of childhood, school debates where she spoke too boldly for her age, teachers calling her spirited when they meant uncontainable. An evening spent at the kitchen table, her mother saying, "Baby, the world won't hand you respect. You make them see it." Years later, in the fluorescent hum of a Texas law classroom, Jasmine would hear echoes of those words. She wasn't the loudest in the room then. She was the sharpest. Her professors noticed the precision, the way she cut through hypotheticals like a scalpel through silk. She didn't just know the law, she felt it, understood its rhythm, the way it could be both shield and sword. But theory wasn't enough. So when classmates chased clerkships and corporate paychecks, Jasmine went where the fight was raw, the public defender's office. There, the stakes weren't intellectual, they were human. Cinematic imagery floods the frame. A cramped office stacked with case files. A clock reading 2:47 a.m. Her eyes red from reading affidavits by fluorescent light. A client's trembling hands across the table, whispering, "They don't listen to me." And her answer? Soft, certain, "They will." The narrator continues. She wasn't raised for silence. She was raised to stand between injustice and the microphone. Every courtroom became a battlefield, every verdict a referendum on dignity. She faced judges who called her young lady, with the same tone they'd never use for men.
prosecutors who smiled too wide when she entered the room, mistaking courtesy for concession. And every time, she met them with the same weapon: composure sharpened by conviction. There's a rhythm to being underestimated. It teaches timing. It teaches patience. It teaches you how to hold still until the room realizes it's already lost. Jasmine learned that rhythm well. Her reputation grew, not as the loudest defender, but the one who wouldn't flinch. Clients called her the one who listens. Colleagues called her the one who wins cases she shouldn't. And behind every headline about reform or justice, there she was, unbothered, precise, unwilling to trade her values for approval. When she entered politics, some said she was too direct, too fierce, too unwilling to play the game. But for Jasmine, there was no game. There was only truth, and those afraid of it. She carried the same courtroom poise into Congress, the same quiet intensity that once disarmed prosecutors now sliced through panels of pundits. The narrator softens. She didn't climb for status. She stepped forward because someone had to, because somewhere out there, a little girl in Dallas was watching. That's what makes her dangerous to men like Stephen Miller, not her voice, but what it represents. A new language of power, one that doesn't ask for permission, one that doesn't tremble in the face of authority, one that smiles when the room turns hostile and says, "Let's begin." In committee sessions, she learned to measure tone, to navigate the unspoken double standards every Black woman in power knows too well. Speak too softly, they dismiss you. Speak too sharply, they call you angry. So she learned to master the space in between, a deliberate, devastating calm, the kind that makes even arrogance hesitate. Clips flash in the montage. Her questioning corporate lobbyists with surgical precision, her dismantling misleading statistics without raising her voice, her defending colleagues when decorum tried to disguise disrespect. Each moment, another thread in the tapestry of a woman who turned restraint into resistance. People saw confidence. What they didn't see was the cost. The exhaustion of having to be twice as prepared, twice as patient, twice as perfect. But Jasmine never asked for sympathy. She asked for accountability, and when she didn't get it, she built her own platforms, her own stage, her own following. By the time she sat across from Stephen Miller that morning, she had already lived a lifetime of interruptions, teachers, judges, colleagues, all trying to trim her voice into something more palatable. It never worked. Every attempt to silence her only sharpened her articulation. Every dismissal carved out another layer of resolve. The narrator leans in, voice low, almost reverent. Some people enter politics to be seen. She entered so others could be heard. It's easy to underestimate a woman who speaks with grace. It's harder when that grace hides fire. And Crockett's fire was different, not chaotic, not destructive, but focused, controlled combustion. Those who followed her career knew this wasn't just another hearing. This was legacy in motion, the daughter of Texas grit standing toe-to-toe with the architect of arrogance. The girl who refused to quiet down for comfort, now standing before a man who built his power on silence. Her mother once told her, when they talk over you, don't raise your voice, raise your worth. And that's exactly what she did. In the committee chamber, under sterile lights and procedural chatter, she adjusted her microphone with steady hands. The weight of her journey, every late night, every courtroom, every insult masked as critique, condensed into that single motion. The narrator concludes, because when she speaks, it's not just Jasmine Crockett in that chair. It's every woman ever told to wait her turn, every voice ever muted by arrogance, every truth ever dismissed because it came from the wrong lips. And then, the sound of the gavel. The session begins. Stephen Miller glances her way, confident, rehearsed. He has no idea that the woman across from him isn't just prepared. She's prophecy with perfect posture. The music swells. The camera zooms. The air tightens. And when the cameras rolled that morning, the narrator whispers, she didn't just walk into a hearing. She walked into history.
The hearing room hums with the static of restraint, that charged silence right before a storm. The walls feel tighter now, as if they've been listening for hours, absorbing every clipped exchange. Jasmine Crockett sits upright, shoulders squared, voice calm. Her notes are neatly stacked, untouched for the last several minutes. She doesn't need them anymore. Across the table, Stephen Miller leans back, fingers tapping in rhythm against the microphone base. His smile, that familiar, patronizing curve, dares her to lose composure. He's already interrupted her 5 times, and the 6th came disguised as a question he had no intention of letting her answer. "Mr. Miller," she begins, tone even but edged. "I've been patient, but—" He slices through her words like a blade through silk. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, patience isn't the issue here. It's the tone of, if you'd allow me to finish." "I am allowing you," he lies, voice dripping with mock courtesy. The audience shifts. A pen clatters, the camera flashes. The tension, once abstract, now feels alive, pulsing between them like a heartbeat. Viewers watching the live feed can almost sense it. Something is about to break. Crockett exhales through her nose, slow, deliberate. Her expression doesn't change, but her eyes, those steady, steel-dark eyes, narrow just slightly. It's the same look she once gave to prosecutors who tried to twist her words on the stand, the same look she gave to judges who doubted her credentials. It's not anger, it's calculation. The narrator's voice cuts in. He thought he was playing chess, but he never realized she'd memorized the board years ago. Miller straightens his papers, pretending not to feel the shift. His confidence flickers. He can sense the audience turning, not against him yet, but toward her. That's the first sign of losing control. He tries to reclaim it. "You see, Congresswoman, it's very simple. Decorum exists for a reason. When individuals, she repeats, one brow arching. The faintest smile ghosts her lips. That's an interesting choice of word." He tries to interrupt again, but the rhythm falters. She's faster now. Her voice slices cleanly through his attempt, steady, firm, unyielding. "With all your talk about decorum, you seem awfully comfortable breaking it every time a woman speaks." The room stills. For the first time, his smirk fades. Cameras click. The staffers exchange quick glances. A spark runs through the gallery, the electric anticipation of witnessing something shift, something bigger than a single exchange. He recovers with forced laughter. "That's not fair, Congresswoman. I'm simply asking questions. And I'm simply trying to answer them, if that's still allowed here." The narrator returns, voice low. In that moment, the tension wasn't just between two people. It was between two versions of power, one inherited, one earned. Miller straightens his papers, pretending not to feel the shift. His confidence flickers. He can sense the audience turning, not against him yet, but toward her. That's the first sign of losing control. He tries to reclaim it. "You see, Congresswoman, it's very simple. Decorum exists for a reason. When individuals—" "Individuals?" she repeats. "I'm focused," she says. "The issue is that you keep moving the goalposts." Her voice never rises. It doesn't need to. Every word lands with precision, each pause measured like the click of a metronome. It's a performance, but not the kind Miller understands. He's used to spectacle. She's offering truth. Slow, deliberate, devastating. Online, the first tweets appear. She's about to end him. Crockett's patience is the scariest thing I've ever seen. This man has no idea what's coming. The comment section floods. Clips circulate before the hearing even ends. The audience, miles away, can feel the temperature change.
They sense the inevitable. Miller interrupts again, grasping for control. "Congresswoman, this isn't about feelings." She tilts her head slightly, voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "You're right, it's about facts, which is why you keep dodging them." He stammers. A pause, then silence. It's brief, but it's everything. The silence says what words can't. He's lost his footing, and everyone knows it. The narrator whispers, "Power is loud until it's afraid." Miller clears his throat. "If I may continue," but the sound of his own voice betrays him. The rhythm is gone, the arrogance dented. He's performing for cameras that have already turned toward her. Crockett straightens her notes, eyes steady on him. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't need to. The audience online, the viewers at home, they're doing it for her. They can feel the momentum shifting. The hearing chair glances nervously between them. Reporters scribble furiously. Even the air conditioning hum feels louder now. And then, silence again. She leans forward, calm deadly. The narrator lowers to a whisper. The room doesn't yet know, it's seconds from erupting.
The room holds its breath. For a heartbeat, the tension itself seems visible, like dust caught in sunlight, hanging between two people who've been circling the same battlefield for years without ever meeting face to face. Stephen Miller leans back, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, certain that he's still in control. It's the smirk of a man who's never been truly challenged, who mistakes persistence for dominance. But Jasmine Crockett's expression doesn't change. She adjusts the microphone, eyes never leaving his. Her voice emerges, calm, clipped, deliberate. "Mr. Miller, you've spent the last 10 minutes talking about tone. But let's talk about substance." He opens his mouth, a reflexive move, but this time she keeps going. The rhythm is hers now. She continues, "You say decorum matters, but what you really mean is control. Because every time a woman like me raises a fact you can't refute, suddenly it's too emotional. Every time we speak with authority, it's too aggressive." Miller's eyes narrow. The smirk fades. Cameras begin to pan closer. The world outside the chamber is already listening. She continues, voice sharpening like glass. "I've seen this tactic before. In courtrooms, in meetings, in every room where power tries to disguise insecurity as civility." The air turns heavy. Miller blinks, the practiced calm replaced with something rawer, confusion. He's off script now. His notes mean nothing. She says, leaning forward slightly, "You talk about law and order, but what you really mean is obedience from everyone but yourself. You invoke rules when it's convenient and ignore them when you're cornered. You demand respect, but you've never once tried earning it." A low murmur ripples through the room. Even those trying to remain neutral can feel it, the shift, the invisible hand turning the stage lights toward her. Miller clears his throat, feigning composure. "Congresswoman, I think we're straying." She interrupts him softly. It's not loud, but it cuts through him like thunder. "No, we're finally arriving." A stunned hush falls. She continues, voice steady, each word an indictment. "You've spent the last 10 minutes talking about tone. But let's talk about substance." He opens his mouth, a reflexive move, but this time she keeps going. The rhythm is hers now. She continues, "You say decorum matters, but what you really mean is control. Because every time a woman like me raises a fact you can't refute, suddenly it's too emotional. Every time we speak with authority, it's too aggressive." Miller's eyes narrow. The smirk fades. Cameras begin to pan closer. The world outside the chamber is already listening. She continues, voice sharpening like glass. "I've seen this tactic before. In courtrooms, in meetings,
in every room where power tries to disguise insecurity as civility. The air turns heavy. Miller blinks, the practiced calm replaced with something raw, confusion. He's off script now. His notes mean nothing. She says, "You talk about law and order, but what you really mean is obedience from everyone but yourself. You invoke rules when it's convenient and ignore them when you're cornered. You demand respect, but you've never once tried earning it." A low murmur ripples through the room. Even those trying to remain neutral can feel it. The shift, the invisible hand turning the stage lights toward her. Miller clears his throat, feigning composure. "Congresswoman, I think we're straying." She interrupts him softly. It's not loud, but it cuts through him like thunder. "No, we're finally arriving." A stunned hush falls. She continues, voice steady, each word an indictment. "You've spent the last 10 minutes talking about tone, but let's talk about substance." He opens his mouth, a reflexive move, but this time she keeps going. She continues, "You say decorum matters, but what you really mean is control. Because every time a woman like me raises a fact you can't refute, suddenly it's too emotional. Every time we speak with authority, it's too aggressive." Miller's eyes narrow. The smirk fades. Cameras begin to pan closer. The world outside the chamber is already listening. She continues, voice sharpening like glass. "I've seen this tactic before. In courtrooms, in meetings, in every room where power tries to disguise insecurity as civility." The air turns heavy. Miller blinks, the practiced calm replaced with something raw, confusion. He's off script now. His notes mean nothing. She says, "You talk about law and order, but what you really mean is obedience. From everyone but yourself. You invoke rules when it's convenient and ignore them when you're cornered. You demand respect, but you've never once tried earning it." A low murmur ripples through the room. Even those trying to remain neutral can feel it. The shift, the invisible hand turning the stage lights toward her. Miller clears his throat, feigning composure. "Congresswoman, I think we're straying." She interrupts him softly. It's not loud, but it cuts through him like thunder. "No, we're finally arriving." A stunned hush falls. She continues, voice steady, each word an indictment. "You've spent the last 10 minutes talking about tone, but let's talk about substance." He opens his mouth, a reflexive move, but this time she keeps going. The rhythm is hers now. She continues, "You say decorum matters, but what you really mean is control. Because every time a woman like me raises a fact you can't refute, suddenly it's too emotional. Every time we speak with authority, it's too aggressive." Miller's eyes narrow. The smirk fades. Cameras begin to pan closer. The world outside the chamber is already listening. She continues, voice sharpening like glass. "I've seen this tactic before, in courtrooms, in meetings, in every room where power tries to disguise insecurity as civility." The air turns heavy. Miller blinks, the practiced calm replaced with something raw, confusion. He's off script now. His notes mean nothing. She says, "You talk about law and order, but what you really mean is obedience from everyone but yourself. You invoke rules when it's convenient and ignore them when you're cornered. You demand respect, but you've never once tried earning it." A low murmur ripples through the room. Even those trying to remain neutral can feel it. The shift, the invisible hand turning the stage lights toward her. Miller clears his throat, feigning composure. "Congresswoman, I think we're straying." She interrupts him softly. It's not loud, but it cuts through him like thunder. "No, we're finally arriving." A stunned hush falls. She continues, voice steady, each word an indictment. "You've spent the last 10 minutes talking about tone, but let's talk about substance." He opens his mouth, a reflexive move, but this time she keeps going. She continues, "You say decorum matters, but what you really mean is control. Because every time a woman like me raises a fact you can't refute, suddenly it's too emotional. Every time we speak with authority, it's too aggressive." Miller's eyes narrow. The smirk fades. Cameras begin to pan closer. The world outside the chamber is already listening.
She continues, voice sharpening like glass. I've seen this tactic before. In courtrooms, in meetings, in every room where power tries to disguise insecurity as civility. The air turns heavy. Miller blinks, the practiced calm replaced with something raw, confusion. He's off script now. His notes mean nothing. She says, you talk about law and order, but what you really mean is obedience from everyone but yourself. You invoke rules when it's convenient and ignore them when you're cornered. You demand respect, but you've never once tried earning it. A low murmur ripples through the room. Even those trying to remain neutral can feel it. The shift, the invisible hand turning the stage lights toward her. Miller clears his throat, feigning composure. Congresswoman, I think we're straying. She interrupts him softly. It's not loud, but it cuts through him like thunder. No. We're finally arriving. A stunned hush falls. She continues, voice steady, each word an indictment. You've spent the last 10 minutes talking about tone, but let's talk about substance. He opens his mouth, a reflexive move, but this time she keeps going. She continues, you say decorum matters, but what you really mean is control. Because every time a woman like me raises a fact you can't refute, suddenly it's too emotional. Every time we speak with authority, it's too aggressive. Miller's eyes narrow. The smirk fades. Cameras begin to pan closer. The world outside the chamber is already listening. She continues, voice sharpening like glass. I've seen this tactic before. In courtrooms, in meetings, in every room where power tries to disguise insecurity as civility. The air turns heavy. Miller blinks, the practiced calm replaced with something raw, confusion. He's off script now. His notes mean nothing. She says, you talk about law and order, but what you really mean is obedience from everyone but yourself. You invoke rules when it's convenient and ignore them when you're cornered. You demand respect, but you've never once tried earning it. A low murmur ripples through the room. Even those trying to remain neutral can feel it. The shift, the invisible hand turning the stage lights toward her. Miller clears his throat, feigning composure. Congresswoman, I think we're straying. She interrupts him softly.
The next morning, the world awoke to a digital storm. Screens flickered alive with the same moment. Jasmine Crockett leaning forward, eyes steady, voice unwavering. You can interrupt my words, but not the truth behind them. It was everywhere. On Twitter, or X as some insisted, the tag #CrockettClapback rocketed to #1 within hours. 10 million views before sunrise. By noon, 20. The clip wasn't just viral, it was seismic. People didn't scroll past it, they stopped, watched, rewound, again and again. Late-night hosts replayed it, the audience roaring before the punchline even landed. Journalists quoted her line in headlines framed like manifestos, when silence met its match. On TikTok, creators synced her voice to music, dramatic beats, slow-motion zooms, edits overlaid with text. Composure is the loudest protest. And in classrooms across the country, professors paused mid-lecture to show the clip as a masterclass in restraint and rhetorical precision. She didn't raise her voice, one said, clicking play. She raised the standard. Cut to a dorm room. College students huddled around a laptop, the screen reflecting in their eyes. One whispers, almost reverently, "That's how you handle arrogance." Another nods, "That's how you handle history." In homes, mothers watched beside daughters, the moment looping on morning news recaps. One mother murmured, "See, that's what power looks like when it doesn't need to shout." The narrator slides in, smooth, cinematic. It wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. A reminder that dignity doesn't need permission to speak. The reaction wasn't confined to admiration, it was participation. Every share, every quote tweet became its own act of solidarity. People wrote about their own interruptions, at work, in class, at home. The moments they'd swallowed truth to stay respectful. Crockett's composure gave those moments a voice. And for once, it felt like the internet wasn't just amplifying outrage, it was amplifying relief. Montage.
a law student in Chicago, practicing Crockett's final line before a moot court round. A black woman executive typing a LinkedIn post titled, "Unbothered is a strategy." A teenage girl in Atlanta editing a TikTok captioned, "She spoke for all of us." And even opponents, quietly, grudgingly, admitted the impact. A conservative columnist wrote, "Miller underestimated her. That was his mistake." Another commentator confessed on air, "You don't have to agree with her politics to admit she dominated that room." The narrator adds, almost like a sigh, "Sometimes power shifts, not with a scream, but with a sentence." By evening, news networks replayed the clip on loop. Analysts debated its implications, but the audience already knew this wasn't policy, it was poetry disguised as testimony. A montage of sound bites, a new icon of political composure. The line heard around the country. One clip, 1,000 conversations about who gets to speak. On Instagram, influencers quoted her. On Reddit, users wrote essays titled "The Anatomy of a Clapback." On TikTok, remixes turned her words into an anthem, slow beats, echoing reverb, crescendos that felt more like revolution than remix. And through it all, Crockett herself stayed silent. No victory lap, no thread explaining herself, just stillness. The same stillness that broke her opponent hours before. The narrator lingers on that detail. While the world shouted her name, she said nothing, because the truth doesn't need to trend to matter. Still, the numbers told their own story. 40 million views in 2 days, hashtags multiplying, hashtag Crockett Clapback, hashtag Truth Over Tone, hashtag She Said Enough. Then came the think pieces, not about her words, but about what they revealed. Articles dissecting how women, especially black women, are policed in speech. How composure itself has become a quiet form of rebellion. One headline reads, "Jasmine Crockett didn't yell, she redefined power." Another, "The new decorum, strength without permission." Every frame of the clip, her pause, her breath, her precision, was analyzed like choreography. Because it was. Intentional, disciplined, devastating. Back in Washington, whispers moved through political circles. Some called it a moment. Others, privately, called it a warning. A senior aide murmured to a colleague, "She made silence look like surrender," until it wasn't. And that was the real shockwave. Not that she had won an argument, but that she had exposed how fragile arrogance looks beside composure. The narrator tone softens. In the age of noise, she proved restraint could still roar. Her voice carried not because it was loud, but because it was unshakable. Cut to screens lighting up across time zones, in Lagos, in London, in Lahore. Her clip subtitled in 5 languages. People quoting her line like gospel. "You can interrupt my words, but not the truth behind them." The image of her leaning forward, that still frame, becomes a symbol. Memes label it the moment control lost its grip. Art students sketch it in charcoal. Activists print it on protest signs. And Stephen Miller? His silence becomes its own headline, his name trending beneath hers, but for the wrong reasons. His smugness, once his armor, now his evidence. The narrator closes this sequence with the gravity of prophecy. It was more than a viral clip. It was an unmasking of arrogance, of fragility, of the myth that power must always interrupt to exist. The music swells, triumphant but restrained. The internet didn't just watch, it remembered. And then the cliffhanger lands, quiet but magnetic. But beyond the viral fame, there was something deeper. A lesson about power itself.